This is Doug Maitland. I'm with the Ohio Department of Transportation, the Office of Real Estate, and this is Module 8 of the Value Finding Module Series. Module 8 is a continuation of the case study, and in Module 8 we're going to discuss the highest and best use determination that's needed for the selection of comparable sales in the Value Finding Report. This module is a continuation of the value finding case study for Parcel 1 of the Butler 73 13.05 project. After the appraisal scoping checklist has been signed and the appraiser is engaged for appraisal service, the appraiser is now solely responsible for the value estimate and the compensation conclusion in the value finding appraisal report. Up until this time, the appraiser most likely hasn't deeply analyzed the property before or after the take or of the parts taken. Now is the time to adequately analyze the property, to assure there are no damages to the residue, and to conclusively determine the property's highest and best use so the correct comparable land sales can be located to use in the sales comparison approach. So let's talk about the property before the taking. So far, what is known about the property before the taking is that it's a rural residential property, improved with a house and a large outbuilding. The site, net of PRO, contains 4.637 acres. It has an irregular trapezoidal shape and has approximately 588 feet of frontage along State Route 73 at the right-of-way line. The frontage is about 621 feet along the center line of State Route 73. The 4.637 acre tract is the whole property and is also the larger parcel. Its drive is 18 to 20 feet wide at the right-of-way line, and it has a full turn movement onto State Route 73. The entire frontage is fenced. The drive is gated with stone walls and pillars on either side. The house and outbuildings sit back from the existing right-of-way approximately 70 feet. The property has a rural residential zoning classification and exceeds all minimums of zoning. Its highest and best use is most likely rural residential as a vacant site before and after the taking. The property's existing single-family use is most likely its highest and best use as improved. Let's talk a little bit about the taking. What we know about the WD taking. The WD taking is from along the entire State Route 73 frontage. It's about 40 feet wide, extending from the property line, running down the center of the road to the proposed right-of-way line. This gross area contains 0.554 acres. Of this 554 acre area, 0.405 acres is encumbered by an existing standard highway easement called PRO, where the property owner still retains some property rights. This area is approximately 30 foot wide from the center of the road into the property. Within this area is road pavement, shoulder, and ditching. The WD acquisition will acquire the remaining rights held by the fee owner in this PRO area. Ohio jury instruction instructs that there is nominal compensation paid for these remaining rights. By ODOT standard, the amount paid in compensation is $1. The remaining WD take is called the net WD and is calculated as follows. The gross take was 0.554 acres. The PRO that comprises the gross take is 0.405 acres, and when you subtract the PRO from the gross take, what's left is the net take, containing 0.149 acres. This net WD area is approximately 10 feet wide along the existing right-of-way. It extends from the existing right-of-way line into 10 feet into the property. The property owner owns 100% fee interest in this area, and the WD take will acquire all rights except for the right of ingress and egress to the residue. This access right provided to the owner will be an 18 to 20 foot wide drive at the new right-of-way line. The construction phase of the project will reestablish the drive entrance. Within the net WD take area are some site improvements that include 1, fencing that extends along the entire road frontage of the property except for the area around the drive entrance. 2, an entry gate at the drive and a stone wall on either side of the drive entrance. And 3, part of the concrete drive. And 4, trees that are scattered throughout the take area. So let's match the detail sheets together to get a better look at this. What we're bringing now are the 3 detail sheets that would comprise parcel 1. That dotted red line is the property line for this parcel. It's the front of the property line. It doesn't show the whole property. That solid red line is the new right-of-way line. So the total take area is 44.8 feet to the right, 618 feet along the center of the road, 49.09 feet to the left, and 588 feet would be the new right-of-way line. That second line I just put in there is the existing right-of-way. That yellow highlighted area is the PRO. The net take exists between those 2 solid red lines. And that net take is 10 feet wide. Adjacent to the net take is the T taking, shown as a blue line. All right, a small part of the stone wall at the drive entrance encroaches into the existing right-of-way. Also, a small area of fencing also encroaches into the right-of-way. And so what you're seeing is a red circle to the left and a red highlighted area. That is showing fencing that slightly encroaches into the right-of-way. To the right of the driveway, you can see another red highlighted area that shows another area where fencing may be encroaching into the right-of-way. Below this sketch is a blow-up of the drive detail. And we've just drawn a small circle to the left of the new driveway, and you can see that there's a stone pillar that encroaches into the existing right-of-way. And to the right, there's another stone pillar that encroaches into the existing right-of-way. Adjacent to that is some fencing that also appears to encroach into the existing right-of-way. The appraisal scoping checklist instructed the appraiser to consider these parts which encroach into existing right-of-way as a non-encroaching improvement. Therefore, they will be part of the compensation estimate. So let's talk a little bit about the temporary, identified as 1T. The T taking is 18 months in duration, starting from the time that ODOT or its contractor enters upon the property. In order for this to occur, ODOT will already have ownership or control of the WD area. As a result, the T acquisition is based on its effect to the residue and not the whole property before the taking. The T area will be adjacent and behind the net WD area. It's irregular in shape, but it's generally long and thin. It contains 0.151 acres. This area generally has no site improvements, is grass covered except for the area of the drive which is improved with concrete. The drive area will be replaced by the project. All right, let's talk a little bit about the residue. The WD taking generally move the right-of-way line closer to the structures on the residue. The new right-of-way line is approximately 60 feet from the structures. This still exceeds the 40-foot setback requirement under the A1 zoning classifications. The residue contains 4.637 acres and still exceeds all zoning parameters, including the 2-acre minimum site size. The residue retains an 18 to 20-foot drive entrance at the new right-of-way line and still has full turning movement, no restrictions to and from State Route 73. The residue no longer has fencing along State Route 73 frontage and has no longer a stone wall, pillar, drive entry, or gate at the driveway. The WD and T takes were restricted to a narrow area along the road. The fencing and gate area that no longer remain on the property do not appear to adversely affect the marketability of the property. The highest and best use of the residue appears to remain rural residential for the site as vacant. The highest and best use of the residue as improved appears to be its existing use as improved with a single-family residential structure and other structures that are rural in nature. It does not appear that the WD and T takings have adversely affected the residue property. Therefore, it's reasonable the residue is not damaged by the taking. As a result, the unit of value for land should be the same for the site before and after the taking. Most of what we just reviewed should have been apparent at the time the appraisal scoping checklist was developed. I'm going to take a quick look at some of the photographs from the appraiser's inspection of the property and also an aerial. Here are the pictures. To the left, you're going to see the fence running from the west side of the driveway going downhill towards the intersection. Below that is a picture looking east from the driveway running towards the cemetery that's next to the property. Pictures on the right show the drive entrance, again looking downhill, and you can see the outbuilding there that's red, and the picture below it shows the stone wall and pillars that abuts the driveway. This other picture shows the picture of the gate that is actually behind the stone pillar. This gate is also taken by the project, and you can also see what the concrete driveway looks at the drive entrance. Note that it's cracked and shows quite a bit of physical deterioration. Here is an aerial. It's from Google Earth. Parcel 1, the whole property, is outlined in blue to the left. You can see it there. Adjacent to the whole property is the cemetery, and we've got a directional arrow showing that. Note that surrounding the property is a lot of agricultural fields with scattered residential housing. All right, let's get into the highest and best use analysis. The appraiser should not be relying totally on the group consensus in the appraisal scoping checklist. From this point on, everything in the appraisal report belongs 100% to the appraiser. So it is the individual responsibility of the appraiser to determine the value of the whole as a vacant site, to select the best comparable land sales that share the same highest and best use, and to reasonably assure that the taking results in no damages to the residue. For these reasons, the appraiser must be very sure of the property's highest and best use, and it's reasonable the appraiser should have some kind of detailed analysis of the highest and best use in their file notes. This analysis does not have to be presented in the VF appraisal report. So we're going to analyze the zoning restrictions. The property, as we know, is located in Wayne Township, Butler County, Ohio. And here is that zoning map from Butler County. Note that a large amount of that map is a green color. So we're going to locate the property that we're appraising. And you've got a black directional arrow that shows you where the property is located at. And now we've just superimposed the Wayne Township zoning legend onto the map. And the zoning of the property, because it's green, is A1 agricultural. All right, so now we are going to go to the official website of Wayne Township, and we are going to select zoning. And when we do that, what pops up is the zoning window. And we are going to select the Wayne Township zoning resolution. And when we touch that, what pops open is the zoning resolution for Wayne Township. And so we're going to go into that zoning resolution and we're going to find A1 Agricultural District. And the purpose is the intent of the A1 Agricultural District is to reserve land exclusively for agricultural cultivation, very low density residential development, and other activities that are basically rural in character. So the permitted uses include agricultural and farms, no more than one family detached dwelling on a single lot, churches, schools, parks, riding stables, public buildings, telecommunication facilities. This is the next page. Permitted uses also include accessory buildings on any lot principally used for residential purposes. 2 accessory buildings per lot may not exceed 2,500 square feet each and may be erected on lots that are 5 acres or less. For those lots that are 5 acres or more, 2 accessory buildings not to exceed 3,500 square foot each. That continues to the next page. Nothing really of note on page 3. Next page. We know that the property is improved with a single family dwelling, and so we select the single family dwelling unit. So single family dwellings are limited to a 2-acre minimum size. The net whole is 4.637 acres, exceeds that zoning requirement. The residue contains 4.488 acres, also exceeds that zoning requirement. If we look at the frontage requirements, the minimum width is 200 feet. So both the whole and the residue at the right-of-way line have 588 feet, definitely exceed that threshold. Front setback minimum is 40 feet. So on the whole before the taking, the house is 70 feet from the right-of-way line and the residue is 60 feet from the right-of-way line. So we definitely exceed those minimum requirements. The setback from the side is 25 feet. The whole, it's 50 feet from the house to the side yard, and the residue remains the same, so we exceed those parameters. The rear, the minimum setback is 50 feet. And for both the whole and the residue, those structures are hundreds of feet from the rear lot line, so we exceed the minimum thresholds there. And lot coverage, not to exceed 25%. The exact coverage is unknown, but it doesn't come close to meeting the 25% threshold. The net whole is 4.637 acres or 201,988 square feet. We multiply that by 25%. That means 50,496 square feet of the site could be covered with structures, and the actual coverage, including home and outbuildings, is much less than this area. Conclusion, the whole and the residue comply with zoning. So here's a highest and best use comparison chart that we've created. The gray area on the right side of each page is the residue, and the non-grayed area would be the whole property before the taking. Physically possible uses before the taking. The whole is the entirety of the property that is under the same ownership. It's valued as if one estate and as if one buyer will purchase the entire tract. For the residue, what is left of the whole after the taking is the residue. Ownership of the whole is Lance Barker. He owns 5.042 acres and has no ownership in any abutting property. The property's use is rural residential. 5.402 acre tract is encumbered with a PRO easement of 0.405 acres. Otherwise, the property is contiguous. The whole property and larger parcel are the same 5.042 acre tract. The whole site net of PRO is 4.637 acres. If we look at the residue, the whole was 5.042 acres. The gross take is 0.554 acres, leaves us a residue of 4.488 acres. If we compare the net whole at 4.637 acres to the residue at 4.488 acres, the residue is 3.2% smaller in size than the whole. The takings were along the road front. The whole property has access to public water, electric, and telephone. An on-site septic system would be required for any development, and this appears to be typical of the area. That is the same for the residue. The existing drive approach is 18 feet wide at the right-of-way line and has full turning movement to and from State Route 73. For the residue, the reconstructed drive approach is also 18 feet at the new right-of-way line, and it also has a full turn movement to and from State Route 73. For the whole, the site is cleared and grass covered. The site is trapezoidal in shape, being wide at the road, narrow at the rear. It has 621 feet along the center line and 588 feet along the right-of-way line. For the residue, it retains 588 feet along State Route 73 at the new right-of-way line. Legally permitted uses. For the whole, it's zoned A1 agricultural. This classification reserves land exclusively for agricultural use, which is very low density residential development and other activities that are rural in character. And that zoning and those uses are the same for the residue. Residential uses are limited to a 2-acre minimum site size, and the site is not large enough to be a viable farm operation. Those restrictions remain with the residue. The whole meets the minimum criteria to be developed with a residential use. The A1 zoning classification restricts uses to agricultural use and very low residential use. Those restrictions remain with the residue. Going to the next page. The whole is encumbered with a large 0.405 acre PRO area that's approximately 30 foot wide, extending along the entire frontage of State Route 73. This reduces the usable area from 5.4042 acres to 4.637 acres. This is a loss in utility of 8% of the whole property. The residue is not encumbered by any PRO encumbered area. Financially feasible uses for the whole. Single-family residential use in compliance with the A1 zoning classification is the most probable financial use. This use is typical of smaller tracts of land in the area. And this feasible use remains the same for the residue. The whole is in an area of rural residential development on small acreage tracts with farming operations on larger tracts. These small tracts tend to be developed with one residential unit. The property is too small to be a viable farm operation. That use remains the same for the residue. Maximally productive use. Single-family rural residential use in compliance with the A1 zoning classification, which is rural residential. And that maximally productive use stays the same for the residue. So, conclusion of highest and best use is vacant. The highest and best use of the residue does not change as a result of the taking. A low-density rural residential use in conformance to the A1 zoning classification and rural residential character of the neighborhood remain unaffected by the taking. There are no apparent damages, which is diminution in value, to the residue as a result of the takings. Comparable land sales should be rural residential use that are of small acreage tracts in close proximity to the larger parcel and relatively recent in time to the effective date of the appraisal. The appraiser also looks at the highest and best use of the property as improved to ensure there are no damages to the improvements as a result of the taking. And again, we've got a comparison chart that we've created here. The Value Finding Appraisal Report only values the whole of the site as if vacant and any site improvements in the take area. Improvements outside the take area are not valued. But in determining if the valuation problem is uncomplicated, we need to be sure the highest and best use of the property as improved is the same as vacant and that it suffers no loss in utility as a result of the project's acquisition from the whole. Such issues in highest and best use can create complicated valuation problems. So again, on the right side of the page is the residue in a gray highlighted area. So what we're doing is we're blending physical, legal, and financial and maximally productive uses in this side-by-side comparison of highest and best use as improved. Property is improved with a single-family home, detached outbuilding and barn, pool, and a lake. An exterior inspection indicates the structures to be of average condition or better and is reasonable that no one would buy the property as improved and demolish the existing improvements. And for the residue, that's the same. The improvements have not been touched by the project. The site contains 5.042 acres and is encumbered with a 0.405 PRO area along the State Route 73 frontage. The main structural improvements to the property exist on the non-PRO encumbered area, which is 4.637 acres. For the residue, the site retains frontage and access to State Route 73, but its size has been reduced to 4.488 acres. The residue is not encumbered by any PRO. For the whole, the existing single-family residential use on a small acreage tract is typical of other properties in this rural area. For the residue, the rural residential character of the property or neighborhood remains unchanged from the whole. Next, the home and barn sit back from the existing road right-of-way about 70 feet, and that exceeds the A1 zoning requirements of 40 feet. For the residue, the WD take has moved the right-of-way line 10 feet closer to the structures. The new right-of-way line is approximately 60 feet from the structures, which exceeds the 40-foot setback required under zoning. Next, for the whole, the concrete drive is approximately 18 foot wide at the existing right-of-way line. The drive is heavily cracked near the road front. There is a full turn movement to and from State Route 73. For the residue, the WD takes 10 feet of the drive. The project rebuilds the concrete drive and drive approach at its entry to State Route 73. The drive width remains about 18 feet at the new right-of-way line and retains full movement to and from State Route 73. For the whole, site improvements close to the road consist of a 4-foot chain link fence running the entire road frontage of the property, concrete drive, wall and pillar structures along either side of the drive entry, an electronic gate, and various trees along the road frontage. For the residue, the site improvements for the uncured residue, they've lost all the fencing along the road frontage as well as the entry along the drive and the electronic gate and numerous trees along the road front. For the property as a whole, the existing single-family residential improvements appear to develop the site to its highest and best use as improved. The existing use of the property complements the highest and best use of the whole as vacant. For the residue, the use of the residue as a one-unit, single-family rural residential property in compliance with current zoning regulations remain unchanged. There are no differences in access to and from State Route 73. The residue, although smaller in size, hasn't lost any of its utility. So, going to the next page, conclusion of highest and best use as improved. The highest and best use of the residue as improved does not change as a result of the taking. It remains as existing single-family rural residential with outbuildings typical of the area on a 4.488 acre residue site. The low-density rural residential use in conformance with the A1 zoning classification. The rural residential character of the neighborhood remains unaffected by the taking. There are no apparent damages, which would be diminution in value, to the residue as a result of the taking. So, in conclusion, as vacant for the whole property, it's single-family residential in compliance with the A1 zoning classification on a PRO encumbered 5.042 acre site. Highest and best use of the whole as improved is its existing use as a low-density single-family residential use in compliance with the A1 zoning classification. For the residue, as vacant, single-family residential in compliance with the A1 zoning classification on a non-PRO encumbered 4.488 acre site. And for the residue as improved, existing use as a low-density single-family residential use in compliance with the A1 zoning classification. In conclusion, the appraiser is sure the residue does not suffer damages as a result of the taking. The comparable site sales need to be rural residential subject to the A1 zoning classification, ideally in close proximity and relatively close in time to the effective date of the appraisal. The comp should be close in size to the whole property, ranging from 3 to 5 acres in size. And the appraiser is to ignore portions of the fence and stone wall that minimally encroach into the existing right-of-way. This highest and best use development is not included in the VF report. The appraiser needs to keep this analysis in their appraisal file. Its purpose was for the appraiser to assure the residue isn't damaged by the take and to be certain of the highest and best use of the whole as a vacant site so comparable land sales can be located. If during this analysis the appraiser discovers something not considered in the appraisal scoping checklist that's relevant, then the appraiser needs to contact the district and a new scope may need to be developed and the fee may need to be amended. A statement of the highest and best use of the property is required in the Value Finding Appraisal Report. All right, it's time for a knowledge check.